Global Outlook Norway, which is held on the opening day of this Arendalsuka, this wonderful festival of democracy. Today, as you know, the theme is a connected world, how to balance economic growth with social protection and environment, social development and environment protection. My name is Anita, and I'm today's moderator. First, some practical information. In case of an emergency, the exits are, you have one here, one at the back over there, and two at the rear, right at the back. It would be great if you could switch off your mobile phones, or at least keep them on silent. Global Outlook Norway is an annual forum to discuss current and future global trends that impact us all. It is a meeting place for interested and interested minds to discuss, to listen, to learn, to understand. It is brought to you by 3 high-tech, innovative clusters from this region in cooperation with Arendalsuka's program committee. And these clusters are GCE NODE, which is a technology cluster within the energy and maritime sectors, the NCE Eyde, which is a cluster of processing industries, which has a strategic focus on corporate social responsibility and sustainability. And the third is the Maritimt Forum Sør, which, as you know, is obviously representing the maritime industry. But very interestingly, is the mic bothering? Or my hair? And very interestingly, it combines experience with academic with experience-based learning. Global Outlook Norway is also partnering with the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Norwegian Shipowners Association, and the Federation of Norwegian Industries. And now, as they say on TV, let's get started. You've heard this saying, it's a bird, it's a plane, no, it's Superman. Well, he is a member of parliament. He's been a minister. He's been a governor for 22 years. He's a senior advisor to the University of Agder. And he, along with a few others, started Arendalsuka 7 years ago. Yes, it's Eyde Cluster. It's been a learning curve, but he, his team, the organizers and partners have transformed this festival into an annual must-attend event, as we can see. Eyde Cluster welcomes you.
Thank you, Anita. It was almost correct. Dear friends, dear Minister Børge, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have you here once again at the Global Outlook and the Arendals Week. The Arendals Week, or Arendalsuka, has become the biggest event and the biggest happening and social gathering between politics and organizations and businesses. We expect some 70,000 visitors this week. There are more than 800 different arrangements during this week, which is enormous for this small town. And that shows that the Arendals Week has a meeting that a lot of people come here, of course to mingle, of course to lobby, but also to discuss and to watch politics, and that's what's our aim. The aim of the Arendals Week is to strengthen the belief in politics, that politics matters for us, and we as people have a voice that is listened to. Global Outlook has been a partner for 4 years, and it's now become a part of the Arendals Week, which we are very proud of. And this happening and this event is very important for business and politics and the social life as well. And you're all very happy. Welcome to this event. We have Mr. Børge Brende here as well, and he has been a friend of Arendalsuka from the start and also a friend of the Global Outlook. We were both politicians from the same constituency in Trøndelag, Sør-Trøndelag. We're both from Trondheim. We both left politics. I have left politics for good. Børge, he had a comeback as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, which I think everybody thinks is a good idea. Whether he will come back in the parliament, I don't know, but we both had our seats in the parliament for many, many years. And we were opponents. I was a member of the Socialist Party. He was a member of the Conservative Party. But we've always been friends, and we've always been front benchers, so that's important. Dear Børge, it's happy to have you here once again as our friend and as our guest. He has been Minister of Foreign Affairs for 4 years from the Conservative Party, but I think he has broad support for his politics, and he is widely recognized in his job and in his politics, both nationally and internationally. He's been a good Minister of Foreign Affairs for our country for the last 4 years. So please, Mr. Berge-Brende, the floor is yours.
Okay, so. Thank you, Øystein, for those very kind words. Thank you, Anita, for your introduction. It's good to be back here. And Øystein is so kind in his presentation. It reminds me about the dinner I participated in New York some time ago, where I think it was this spring, where Henry Kissinger was the dinner speaker. And he was introduced in a very nice way. And when he took the floor, he said, you know, they claim that I take these dinner talks because of the salary or the remuneration. That's not true. It's only these days because of the introduction. So I'm not taking any paid for this. It's just a pleasure to be here, and also with Øystein, as he said, he used to represent the Socialist Party in the Parliament. I'm still in the Conservative Party and have no other plans, while Øystein has moved slightly to the right. But he proves that, you know, sometimes you feel that common sense is not that common in this job, but Øystein, you always had a lot of common sense, and you have also continued to prove that. So, what is at stake globally? I think we are at a real crossroads. It is hard to define a crossroads when you're in the middle of it, but I think the 4 last years have shown us that there is so much unpredictability in the world and so many changes that we're not only industrial-wise moving into a 4th industrial revolution, with robotization and all this, but we also see it geopolitically that a lot is at stake. The whole liberal world order that we built since the Second World War is being challenged. Not only all other places in the world, but also partly in the midst of our own continent. Churchill once said that the farther backward you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see. And let's look at what we have achieved. I will not go all the way back to 1945, but just look at 1990. Since 1990, we have doubled the global GDP. We are producing double as much today than we did 27 years ago. At the same time, we have increased the global trade 3 to 4 times. Trade has been a driving vehicle, an engine of growth. If you look at it in a counterfactual manner, I think we would not have seen that growth if we haven't had this win-win thinking. This is good for you, then it's good for me, and vice versa. The chance to also pursue your own comparative advantages. Since 1990, we have seen a growth in the global population from 5 billion people to 7 billion people in 27 years. We have added more people to our planet than there lived people on our planet in the year of 1900. Then it was 1.8 billion. Since 1990, we have decreased the amount of people living in extreme poverty globally from 40% to far less than 20%. And there are so many smart people here that I already seen that you're figured out, going from 40 to 20 is impressive in itself. But when you added 2 billions on the top of the 5 billions, it is unparalleled, very consequential. And we have to continue on a path that secures us the same kind of growth also in the coming 27 years. We are moving from 7 billion people today to 10 billion in 2050. And if we are not able to double the GDP, if you're not able to also secure that by increased trade, we will not succeed in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. We will not achieve this historic poverty alleviation that we have been through. An additional challenge is what you write here, a connected world, how to balance economic growth, social development, and environmental protection. We have to secure that growth, but we have to do it under the framework of sustainability and inclusiveness. We really have to decouple the growth that we will have to see with growth in CO2, and we have to make sure that the growth and the wealth trickles down. Hardworking people also have to see that they benefit from this growth. That has happened also during the 27 last years, but even more so, it needs to happen moving forward. But why am I worried? I'm very worried because some of the principles that are prerequisites for what we have achieved is now being challenged. We know that in the economic field, the world is a connected world. Remember in 2008, there were people saying, oh, Lehman Brothers went bust. This is a question of American subprime. It will not affect the rest of the world. It's a decoupling. Took 3 months, and the challenges were bigger in Europe. Only last week, Greece, for the first time, were able to sell state bonds. Able to sell, but also someone buying them. That's a prerequisite. It has taken Europe that long to get out of the woods, and we're not there yet. So we are connected. We are also more and more connected when it comes to geopolitical challenges. Look at migration. Who was talking about migration being a big challenge in 2013 when I took over as foreign minister? It was not even raised. ISIL didn't exist. Brexit. Who could think of the second largest economy in Europe moving into a situation, moving out of the single market? A more and more authoritarian Turkey, a G20 country. Russia not complying with international law. Just for the first time since the Second World War, one European country just took a piece of another European country. So what we have seen of a connected world economically, we also seen geopolitically. If Africa don't succeed in moving from 1 billion people today to 2 billion people in 2050, these problems are not only Africa's problem. They are as much our problems, but we're not acting accordingly. This is something that we have to take very, very seriously. But coming back to the growth engine, have you tried protectionism, mercantilism, beggar your neighbor strategies before? Coming back to Churchill. Yes, we have. In 1929, when the stock market fell with 80%, one decided, many nations, to just look at its own short-term interest. So due to protectionism, the global trade fell with 50%, the global GDP fell with 25%, and we had a depression and mass unemployment. And we had the 30s that was the basis also for undercurrents of fascism, Nazism, and also other populist ideologies. And we decided in 1945 that this never was going to happen again in our part of the world. That's why we built the United Nations. That's why we built the Coal and Steel Union, the European Union. That's why we also created NATO in 1949. That's why we created Bretton Woods, World Bank, IMF, and not at least the World Trade Organization. And Azevedo, the head of the WTO, is saying now clearly that we are seeing more protectionist measures being taken for the first time in many decades than we see liberalization of the trade order. We are doing a major cardinal mistake if our answer to today's challenges are protectionism and beggar your neighbor tactics. We need a successful outcome of WTO. We need the WTO as a bulwark against protectionism. I open up for regional trade agreements, bilateral trade agreements, and all this. But we should also avoid the spaghetti bowl. The best thing is a multilateral agreement where you compete and do well because you have the best product, not because you have the strictest protection or you take other measures. So, where do we stand? For the first time since 2008, the IMF and also the World Bank and OECD has clearly said that the growth is going to stick to 3% this year. They're not downgrading the growth expectations. This is very important. I think if we as Europeans stick together, secure the internal market, make sure that the Brexit doesn't make us into a more vulnerable economy, make sure that Schengen works, make sure that Europe also handles migration in a sensible way, and that we are able to also really be a clear partner with those countries that need our partnership, that Europe further takes more responsibility for our own security. That's necessary because no one else will do that in the future. Our close ally, the US, is still there, and it's very important for Norway. But there is a fact that there is an Atlantic Ocean between the US and ISIL, mass migration, and also more and more assertive Russia. Europe has to rise to the occasion. We have to increase our own capabilities to secure our own sovereignty. We have to step up what we're doing in defense. We have to be aggressive when it comes to being a partner with new and growing economies when it comes to trade. If the US decides to pull out of TPP, this Trans-Pacific Agreement, if they decide to pull out of TTIP, we will have to go in a very vigorous way to also establish our own trade agreements, for example, with Asia. In few decades, Asia will be 50% of the global GDP. So we need to really move fast, but we need to do that also in a way where we decouple growth from growth in environmental challenges, and we have to make it also more inclusive. And we have to stick to the principles and never compromise on international law, because international law is our first line of defense. And we have to be patient, and we have to show that we're ready to also deal with what is unpredictable. Some people are saying to me, oh, after 2 years, why don't we now look at the sanctions on Russia in Ukraine? Probably some of you have heard this question also. My clear answer is that ask this question to Kremlin. They have the key. If they comply with international law, if they pull out their soldiers from eastern part of Ukraine, the sanctions are gone. So we also have to be very clear in such a complicated international landscape that we are in the front line to defend all what we have achieved. And what we have achieved is tremendous. We have freedom of speech. We have gender parity. We take it for granted that women have the same rights as of course, men. We have inclusive societies. We also are tolerant and inclusive when it comes to sexual minorities. We have created something that is very, very special in our part of the world, and we have to be even clearer in standing up to the principles, to the liberal world order, and we need a Europe that we don't see moving apart from each other. We need more convergence. And that convergence makes us strong, and we have to stick together in the coming years, and then we also will continue to be successful. Thank you.
And but at the same time, what you highlighted was that very often when we are focused on the challenges, we forget the successes that we have achieved and which we have over the past, as you mentioned, 27 years. But then there are also, past experience, as you said, we can look into the past to look into the future. And I would be neglecting my duty if I did not ask you a question on the #1 foreign policy challenge right now, which is North Korea. Past experience also tells us that when countries are on the brink, it can just take a mishap, a miscalculation, or a mistake for an actual war to happen. What is the danger of this war of words to trigger a real war?
So first, a disclaimer. Raising that question with the foreign minister, I think will cater the most boring answer.
Then don't be the foreign minister for now.
So it's hard to, and it's not only that I will answer as a foreign minister today, I hope to also be the foreign minister after the 11th of September, So, but it has developed the rhetoric on North Korea in an unproductive way during the last weeks. I think the right strategy when it comes to the young leader in Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un, is to be predictable and clear. That's why we need to continue the pressure from the Security Council. And remember, these are one of the few things the Security Council agree on. There is consensus in the Security Council. Yippee. Hasn't
15-0.
Yeah, hasn't proved possible in Syria, 400,000 people killed. Hasn't proved possible in Libya, hasn't proved possible Ukraine, and etc. But on North Korea, there is consensus. As late as 5th of August, there was consensus to increase the sanctions on the regime in Pyongyang. We need to be clear and consistent, but we also have to have a strategy for dialogue and finding solutions. We are tough because we want a result, and the result is something that we all can accept and that is possible to continue with. Pyongyang is not, they know that by having successfully tested nuclears 5-6 times, built ballistic capacities, they know they have a very powerful weapon. And maybe Kim Jong-un sees himself as someone that should naturally have dialogue with the President of the United States of America. I don't necessarily think so. So sometimes we have a system of, If I'm not commenting it, it's the state secretary, or you have a political advisor, or you have the press person in the foreign ministry. And that works pretty well, and it's well thought through when we respond to this different kind of statements. 6-party talks that we previously had did not produce a result, but they were not unhelpful. So EU is today meeting, all the EU foreign ministers in Brussels. Mogherini has called for a meeting and gonna give an input to a strategy. I don't think this will end in a war. I don't think it will end in something dramatic, provided that we from here lay a strategy together with the Chinese and the Russians, and we move forward and continue the pressure. Because the one that is guilty is, of course, Kim Jong-un. He has developed nuclear capacities totally against every international law. So he has to be held accountable for that. But at the same time, with that powerful weapon in his hands, we need him to change. And it's so unique that we have consensus in the Security Council. That's why I think the UN ambassadors have to work further on this.
You mentioned Churchill and history. The history of warfare is also the history of technological innovation. What are the foreign policy challenges when you have information wars or cyber wars, which are neither visible nor nonviolent?
Look at what's unfolding in the superpower, reminding superpower in the world. The US, 25% of the global GDP, 5% of the global population, 50% of the global military capacity. They're having an investigation going on based on suspicions that Russia tried to intervene in their election campaign. Cyber. We are relying more and more, our global economy, on the internet, on being interconnected. It is unfortunately very low cost measures to jeopardize and also harm that system. We have not invested in the fight against cyber attacks and invested in cybersecurity at the level we should. Because what you can destroy is very much the basis of the whole economic system. So we need to proportionally also invest in precautionary measures. And I think we as leaders will have will be a very tough verdict on our way of addressing this if we don't step up in a major way.
Thank you so much. I have many more questions, but the clock says 0 time. So thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. A warm round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. We'll ask you now. On behalf of the speakers, the organizers are going to make a donation to the Doctors Without Borders to support the fantastic international work that they are doing. The speakers are also getting some Heimdall chocolates, which, as you know, is the delicious handcrafted chocolates from this region. Presenting it to Børge Brende, as well as all the speakers, will be Anne Marchioro, the conference director. Thank you very much, Foreign Minister. Well, we go to the next part of our program. 2,500 years ago, a wise man called Buddha said change is the only constant in life. Fast forward many centuries, and you had scientific backing given to what the Buddha said by Charles Darwin with his theory of evolution. Evolution is all about change and adapting to change. But there is a big difference between then and now. We live now in a world of accelerating change. Everyone over here can confirm how just in the last 5 years, our lives have been transformed by just 3 things: the internet, the smartphone, the computers. The computers, they say, goes back to the time of Adam and Eve. Yes, it was the Apple. But It had limited memory. One byte and everything crashed. But we have come a long way from that. As the foreign minister mentioned, we are in the world today of the fourth industrial revolution. We live in a world of big data, algorithms, of artificial intelligence, digitalization, machine learning, augmented reality, 3D printing. And all these have combined together to bring exponential changes. So, and it's technology that is bringing about these big changes. And we find these impacting us in every aspect of our life, whether it is voting, whether it is careers, whether it is our behavior pattern. So how do we navigate this world of accelerating change? How do we prepare for the future when we don't even know what the future looks like? We are very privileged to have Carsten Beck, who is the Director of Research in Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. He's an expert on mega trends, on strategic processes, globalization, innovation, environment, and many, many more things. I can't possibly remember them all. But he also has unique expertise in preparing his clients for future possibilities. So Carsten Beck speaks to us now on how to navigate in a changing landscape.
Thank you. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you, Anita, for inviting me and the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies to come here today to Norway, to Arendalsuka, to talk about what is very much on the heart and minds of everybody, I think, at the moment, the future. We heard it from the foreign minister talking about all the things we have achieved in the last couple of decades, or maybe a little bit longer, if you look back in time. And we also heard a very strong message about the future perspectives. First of all, that we kind of need to continue the journey, both as societies on a global scale, on a local scale here in Norway, and also on a business scale when we look at individual organization and businesses. And had we met at the first Arendalsuka, maybe we would have said, "Oh, we just need to continue, and we know about the mega trends, and we know about digitalization, and there's a little bit of unrest somewhere in the world, but we'll manage." That was kind of the mindset maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Today, it is all about unpredictability, and it is about understanding not only the questions that we need to ask each other, but also try to get a grasp of some of the solutions. And for this, we have 20 minutes. So we will speed it up as we move into the megatrends and try to look at some of the issues that we are dealing with at the Copenhagen Institute. First of all, very, very briefly, my name is Carsten Beck, as was said in the introduction. Director of Research at the Copenhagen Institute, an institute working across the globe, mainly in Europe, North America, and the Middle East, on everything related to the future and megatrends. We work for governments, we work for big business, Google, Toyota, IKEA, companies like that, on mapping trends that are going to be of importance to markets, to societies, and to businesses. Founded back in 1970 by the gentleman to the right there in the picture, Mr. Torkel Christensen, who used to be a finance minister in Denmark and also were the general secretary of the OECD. So that's sort of the background for CIFS. Let's go into the trends. Why do we actually need to look at trends? Well, first of all, why do we need to work with scenarios for the future? First of all, there's a multitude of trends out there that are going to be of immense importance in the coming 5 to 10 years. And if we want to make a priority, we still see digitalization, as we heard Anita talk about, as the major trend in the coming 5 to 10 years. It has been transforming everything. It will continue to transform everything. And we still feel at the Copenhagen Institute that we need to remind ourselves that we are still in the Stone Age with this. It's 10 years old. So when we sometimes struggle with new business models, and we will hear about that in some of the other speeches today, and we struggle about what does democracy look like, or what should the legal system do in a highly digitalized world, and maybe we struggle to find the answers. We are not surprised. We are not surprised because this is only 10 years old. This is 10 years old. What is it? 8 years ago, we wrote a report at CIFS where we said to our member companies throughout the world that in the future there will be no offline and there will be no online because it will be mixed together all the time. And half our member companies said, no, and we still need to have these offline parts of the world or society or a business process or whatever have we, and then we can have the online world with the internet and the laptops and the servers over there. And today, it's like this. It's like this. Look at yourself today. You're sitting here, you're listening to the presentation, the speeches, and Anita said, you said, turn off the mobile phones. I'm standing here on stage, I can see at least one texting at the moment. Danish guy, not very interesting. So it's in line, it's in line. And that is by far the biggest trend. It's personal, it's on organizational levels, and it's on societal levels. Where will it end? Well, you need to make scenarios, as I wrote on the previous slide. We don't know. We don't know. We need to create scenarios for the future of digitalization. I did a workshop with a medium-sized Danish company, 1 billion kroner in turnover, and one of the scenarios we worked with was actually to say for this company, well, let's call Amazon and let's do it tomorrow and say, we surrender. You can just come, you can take over the market here in Scandinavia because we don't stand a chance. So will we see a future where it will be 3 or 4 behemoth, big organizations based on platforms or whatever that will take over the world? Or will we see some other kind of models appear? We simply don't know. And when you look at a quote like this, I mean, will it come true? I have no clue. But it is kind of fascinating. And they are moving into area after area after area. Business, sectors, countries. So could it hit you guys here in the room? Could it hit CIFS? Maybe it could. So on an organizational level, this is changing rapidly. And then also, I mean, one of the big discussions we have today in Western Europe and in the States, the minister touched upon it a little bit, is the concept of growth and how we can keep the growth rates at a sort of a steady state and continue to expand the global economy. What does that mean for people? What does that mean for everyday people here in Norway and Denmark and the States when they go to work? What should they do in order to create value? I had the pleasure of working with the Norwegian legal system here in the spring of 2017. And I had one slide from that slide deck that I just brought with me here today as well. I've talked to all the judges of Norway on conferences in Tromsø and Oslo and Bergen and everywhere. And they were also texting while I was talking, but not when I showed this slide. Not when I showed this slide. That we have at Michigan State University, we had an algorithm, and it's already a couple of years old, that are able to predict over 70% of the Supreme Court's decisions in the States, and 71% of the votes of the individual justices. So here we have some of the most clever people in the world, or in Norway at least. Long educations, really long. And all of a sudden, they have a discussion. Oh, are we needed in the future? Do I really need to go to work in the future? And we had a discussion saying, oh, but it's about trust, and if it's a big and complicated case, you probably would like to have a human being there in the room when you get a sentence if I've done something wrong or my company has done something wrong. But do we really, really need that? Well, I obviously don't know you here in the room, but think about your work. When you come home to your company's organizations a week's time from now, and you go to work, how much will the algorithm take over in your field of expertise? Question mark. Question mark. So that's the first big driver. We'll hear way more about digitalization from some of the other presenters today. The second biggest driver when it comes to the future right here in 2017 is, and we heard about that as well from the minister, it's this guy. I mean, he is good news for futurists across the globe. Obama, boring. He had plans and he thought about things, and you didn't really need scenarios because he actually had a policy for stuff. Today, and I'm making a joke out of it, I know, today everything is in shambles. We simply don't know. And it is true, like the minister said, obviously, that when you look at the institutions we have created since the Second World War, he's questioning each and every one of them. Each and every one of them. And do they work? Yeah. 100% no. But have they created the results? Absolutely. And all of a sudden, we are in a situation where we simply don't know whether or not the institutions, they will be kept alive. And that's also a very, very important reason for creating scenarios. So, well, what do you do as a company? What do you do as a society? Well, you need to look up. You need to look into all kinds of trends. You need to create scenarios that are a little bit more extreme than the scenarios you used to create in your industries. And we actually have some numbers that shows that this is the case. This is a study, global study done by Boston Consulting last summer in the States. And what they have done is that they have, for some reason that we don't really understand the SIFs, they have charted the average lifespan of global citizens. So the average lifespan, how long is that? From 1950 and almost until today. And then they have, on the same chart, they've put in the average lifespan of not global companies, but American publicly listed companies. And as you can see on this chart, we actually have a situation where, well, first of all, there's a positive news here. If you look at the green chart, the green line, the average lifespan of people, it's increasing year after year, which is very, very good. It's a very happy result, and we should all be proud of that. But if you look at it from an organizational perspective, a business perspective, institutional perspective, you have the orange, dark orange curve, and it's a little bit a bumpy ride, but there is a trend, and the trend is going down. So right now we have positive news. It's a good situation we're in here in 2017. We live long and increasingly prosperous lives, but organizations. Why do we need organizations? Why do we need businesses? Why do we need the big global brands as we see them out in society today? That's a challenge. That's a challenge. I've shown this to a number of business people across the world, and they get a little bit itchy when they look at this and go a little bit, yeah, could hit us as well. So we have serious discussions based on this, actually. Then I've shown it also to a lot of students, not across the globe, but here in Europe. And students, young people, they look at this and go, yeah, sure. Why would we need organizations? Well, they're maybe good for something, I don't know. And if they can offer me a job with an interesting career perspective or whatever have we, fine. But why do we really, really need institutions? Question mark. So that is one of the reasons that we see an increasing interest in scenario building at businesses at the moment. So that was the organizational perspective. Create scenarios that are more, allow you to be more sort of resilient when it comes to the future and have more agile responses. Then if you look at, at the individual level, what does people do? What do people do when they look at this future that is difficult to predict? Well, we can see in our studies that there are three main responses, so to speak, when it comes to the future. And the first is this. It's actually people in Europe, in the States, in the world, that when confronted with the future, whether it's in your businesses or in Norway or in Europe, well, when they're confronted with the future, they will tend to feel and think, oh, this is bad. This is not going to be a good conversation because it's about the future. So if I should have a conversation about the future, I would like to have a conversation that takes me back to the past. Because the future is a scary place to be. So if I have to elect a president or a new government here in the fall, I would like to elect someone that can make me feel secure and create security for my family, job-wise, physical security, whatever have we. So they think about the future as a place of losing things. They lose safety, they lose trust, and they would like to go back to the way things used to be. We see that in the States. We see that in Europe at the moment. So that's the first response. And we have a lot of people thinking like that at the moment. Then we have the second response, and we have third in all, so you can probably guess what the last one is going to be about down here. The second response is people that have an orientation towards the present. So this segment of the population, they will simply say, when you come to them and talk about the future, they will say, not really interested. The future, I don't really care. Today, yes. The sun is shining. There are food stalls down there. There will be a concert over there. The brunch was nice at the hotel. Today is important. 5 years from now, who knows? Who cares, basically? So these people, all they care about, well, not all, but what they care about is the present situation. So when you ask these people, whether it's citizens in your cities or your communities or it's customers at your business, they will think, if asked about the future, okay, but what happened last time I met you? Was it good or bad? And then they will elaborate on that. So basically, they want more of what we deliver today. And then finally, we have the people oriented towards the future. And here, there's nothing right or wrong. This is attitudes we're describing here. But people oriented towards the future, they think, just by mentioning the word future, that this is going to be fantastic. We heard all the great numbers from the minister. We know that we can use technology in new and maybe mysterious, but also glorious ways. This will be a fantastic future. And they would like to have a say, and they would like to co-create the future together with you. So these three responses you need to think about when you communicate your strategy about the future to whatever kind of stakeholder group that are important to you here in this room. And our hypothesis at SIFS at the moment, and it is a hypothesis because, to be honest, we don't have data on a global scale on this, but we have an idea. And our idea is that over the last 5 to 10 years, we have seen more people at the top and more people at the bottom. When we look at the debates 10 years ago or 15 years ago in Europe, it was very much the present situation. What can we do when we don't like the Germans and blah, 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 blah. Today, we have a clear profile of people saying, this is going the wrong way. We need to stop the future. And we also have a very clear profile of people saying, oh, I would like to be part of the future. I would like to invent it. I would like to go gung-ho into this new digital whatever kind of world. And the problem for you the problem for all of us, me included. If we have to talk to a broad base of stakeholder groups, then you need to design a strategy and use scenarios and think about how you communicate in a manner that don't scare away these two outlier groups, because they're probably going to be more important for you in the future. And this is one of the biggest tasks. Do I have another 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes? Okay, well, 2 minutes. Very fast, yeah. This will be of very, very big importance to you, because the worst thing that actually can happen for someone who's oriented towards the past is to meet someone who's oriented towards the future, and vice versa. So really think about how you can get everybody into the future at the same time. 1.5 minutes. All the megatrends we work with here at SIFS, we have on this slide, and each of these megatrends is a wonderful presentation that we could talk about for 2 hours. But this is basically what we work with at SIFS and what we see as the big change drivers globally, also here in Norway in the coming decade, the coming 10 years. Some of them might be old hat and you know about them. Some of them are actually new and might actually mean a revolution for you and your society and your business. So if I should leave you with just 1.5 slide. This is the half slide, very important. Really, when you look into the future, start by looking into and examining these megatrends. Think about the consequences, whether it's about supply chains, it's about cities, it's about energy perspectives, whatever we are going to hear about today. And then, as the minister said, it is about living with unpredictability. So let me finish off with this slide that kind of sums it all up. This is a stupid picture I found on the internet, like everybody else does in 2017, but I like it because it tells me a story about the future. It tells me that the future is a little bit like the child over here to the left, busy with life, doing whatever, playing, working, loving, hating, whatever you do in life, and using whatever instrument is within reach to create his or her future. And that's going to be the future of societies, of the legal system here in Norway, of markets, of organizations, of institutions. And the big shift, and that will be you guys here in the room, together with me, is that people like us, we still have too much of this. We still think of the world as, okay, I'm in the bucket business. And if someone, this kid over there, would like a bucket, they can come to us and we will provide them with a bucket. And we don't deal in shovels or in water or logistics out here. We have our ways of thinking and our ways of working. And basically, they should pay attention to us because we are the experts. And what we are saying, and final sentence now, here we have the expert. Busy with life, doing whatever, living in unpredictability, and perhaps, hopefully having a positive outlook on the future, and he or she will be in charge. So take this picture, go back to the boardrooms, and have a discussion on how you can move from the right to the left. That's the future. Thank you.
Great slide. And we can see this is the linear one, and that is, the other picture, which is all jumbled up and great creativity. But it can be complete chaos.
Yeah.
You can build something completely wrong.
Yeah.
And then?
Yeah.
Where am I as an individual? Where is the world?
Yeah. This is chaos.
Live with chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is chaos. Absolutely. To take any judges in the room today? No? The judges one more time. When we talked about algorithms and artificial intelligence, I wouldn't say they were scared, but they all of a sudden saw a future where you could get whatever the legal system is providing us today, we can get that anywhere. So why do we need the systems? And this is chaos. And that's why you need to create scenarios and you need to challenge yourselves. If we had met 10 years ago, we would have said the same, but someone has just pushed the gas pedal in the last 10 years. So it's chaos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will take questions for Carsten later in the program. Thank you very much, Carsten.
Thank you.
If gravity is what holds the planet together, then it is energy that keeps the planet on the move. The hunger for energy has fueled wars, pollution, environmental degradation, but it has brought tremendous good: economic growth, promoted prosperity, and also improved dramatically our quality of life. And Norway is a great example of the wise use of energy and achieving economic prosperity, balancing it with environment protection and social development. But huge challenges remain in the world. 1.3 billion people still lack access to electricity. Climate change is considered to be one of the defining challenges of our century, and 2/3 of carbon emissions come, as we know, from energy production and consumption. And there are big political changes, as when President Donald Trump pulls out of the Paris Climate Agreement. And there are big changes happening within energy spheres. For instance, in the past, energy companies had a 30-year horizon. And this was very good because they had huge investments to make, but they had a certain predictable time frame. But all that has changed because of energy policy shifts, because of technological changes, and because of consumer behavior patterns that have changed consumer demands and expectations. So what does the future of energy look like? Sharing her insights today with us is Sarah Ladislaw, who is the Director of Energy and the National Security Program in Washington Center for International and Strategic Studies. She's an expert on energy policy, oil and gas markets, technology, climate change, and Sarah Ladislaw speaks to us on strategic insights into the future of energy.
Good morning. Afternoon. Good afternoon. Sorry, my head is clearly in the morning back in Washington. Thanks very much for having me here today. I will say this is my 5th time in Norway. And as I told some people last night, every single time I visited, the weather is like this. So I think all of that rumor about raining all the time and very cold and windy is just a lie to keep tourists away. So very pleased to be here and really commend the organizers of this conference and everybody involved for doing what I think is really important, which is talking about the needs and the value of a globally integrated community. In Washington these days, as many of you can imagine, it's a topic of conversation, how we are integrated with the rest of the world and how we should act in accordance with some of the things that we've been talking about this morning, whether it's norms and institutions, or working together to deal with the challenges of the future. And I'm really pleased to be able to say that I think energy is a big part of what can be a success story along all of those lines. Just really quickly, CSIS, for those of you who don't know, is a security-oriented think tank. It's nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we basically focus on things that we think are strategically important to the international security community. The program that I run is the Energy and National Security Program, and it was started in the late 1970s in the wake of the Arab oil embargo. But since that time have, like the rest of the center, gone from sort of a traditional idea of international security, which is oriented around defense topics and guns and bombs and weapons and things like that, to also include what are the pillars of real sort of global stability, which is economic growth and wealth, poverty alleviation, and things like climate change. And so we focus on a whole range of issues at CSIS, and I think I empathize with Carsten's challenge of fitting all of the things that we work on into a short 15-minute segment. I'd also like to say I was asked to come and speak about 3 different things. 1 is energy insights, 2 is geopolitics and security, and 3 is what's happening in Washington. I guarantee you I won't do all of those things adequately within 15 minutes. But what I will try to do is address geopolitics and international security and what's happening in Washington through an energy landscape, and I hope to share some of those thoughts with you today. So I think that a lot of the outlooks that we spend time looking at in the energy space do what is important, which is look out over a 2040 time horizon. But I think, as both the Minister and Carsten have mentioned this morning, in a period of profound and dynamic change, sometimes looking out that far isn't particularly helpful. And what we're finding these days is people are more interested in where we are right now and what the immediate future might mean for them, particularly folks in the energy sector. Anything over a 10, 20, 30, 50-year time frame can certainly all come out in the wash, right? Everything can work out. We know that over those times, some of the perturbations that you see in energy markets can work out. But over shorter periods of time, particularly ones where we're seeing a lot of change go on, it's really hard to figure out what your next step or your next move might be, whether you're a government or a company or a member of civil society. So I'd like to talk about where we've been and what the current energy paradigm is and where we might be going from here. And if you look at the period between 2000 and 2010, why do I bring this up? Because I think some of those motifs, especially for people who are not involved in the energy sector, still color their view of what the energy world is really about. Between 2000 and 2010, energy demand was fundamentally driven by rapid Chinese economic growth, energy-intensive growth and rapid growth. And between 2010 and 2017, we've seen that growth slow down. Not only has that growth slowed down from an average of 10% per annum over that previous time period to about 7%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in a $10 trillion economy, it actually is quite a bit. We've also seen the nature of their growth change. The energy intensity of their economy has downshifted. They've moved much more towards the service sector, and they've made great strides in trying to bring in non-fossil-based energy resources into their energy mix. We wrote a report several years ago because people kept asking us, is China good for climate change? What China's doing on the global stage, is it valuable, is it not valuable? And we wrote a report called The Leader and the Laggard, China's Role in the Global Climate Change Challenge. And the point of this report was not only were they the largest emitter in the world, but they were also the largest largest market for renewable and nuclear energy technologies. They were making the future opportunities at the same time that they were certainly part of the global pollution challenge. And I think the energy world is sort of filled with those sorts of seeming contradictions, but really important to understand. The second is that the world was driven by OECD economies. Energy and quite frankly, the global economy between 2000 and 2010. OECD economies, developed economies, were not only the largest portion of energy demand growth, but they were also, energy demand period, but they were also growing quite quickly. The period in about 2006, non-OECD economies surpassed the overall size of OECD economy energy demand. And since over that 7-year period between 2010 and 2017, OECD energy growth per year has actually been on the decline by about negative 0.3%. Now, it's a small decline, but juxtaposed with non-OECD economic growth, energy growth, which has been about 3.7%, you can really see sort of the divergence in those worlds. Most of the energy growth going forward is coming from non-OECD economies, and I think it's really important for us to understand that the kinds of policies that countries like China, like India, like the 13 other economies that basically represent most of the energy demand growth between now and 2040, will be the shapers of the future. There's a lot on the innovation side and new models and new business models and new technologies and new policies that developing countries can advance going forward. But I really think that it's important for a lot of us to get to know much better what the priorities and the prerogatives are of these rapidly emerging developing economies, because they really will sort of shape the future of energy demand. Scarcity and security was sort of the mindset then, right? Think about the fact that you had a lot of energy demand coming, and you had not much supply. I remember I was working for the U.S. federal government at the time, and people were really worried. Prices for oil had ratcheted up to $140 a barrel. There was a lot of concern about whether or not we were going to be able to meet supplies for resources across the board, even within the context of within China, a coal-abundant country, worried about being able to get their supplies of coal and adequate supplies of quality coal to where they were going to need it to be able to continue to grow. Scarcity and security were really the driving forces during that period of time. We were worried about resource nationalism. There was a lot of concern about that within the Western Hemisphere, the region where I worked. Right now, and perhaps because of the global economic slowdown, but also because of the declining cost for a variety of technologies, including renewable energy technology, but also natural gas and oil markets of for which both are oversupplied at this period of time, has really brought us into a period of abundance. This idea that there's a lot of energy out there, and that we don't really have to be, that there's more competition among fuel suppliers, among the purveyors of energy services, has really sort of changed the competitive dynamic. This is not to say that there is no concern going forward about things like energy security. As we've learned numerous times, you can have a lot of resources, but if you don't have the value chains and the supply chains and the right economic incentives to get them to market, those resources in the ground or in the atmosphere, whatever you are, whichever sort of energy you're going after, don't make it to market, and it's as good as not there. So I think we have to be very careful going forward that this idea of abundant energy supply doesn't leave us being quite complacent. And then finally, bigger is better, the dominance of scale. During this period of time, we were thinking about oil sands, right? We were developing a lot of very large projects, deep water oil projects, things that were scalable, utility scale projects. This was the period in which we thought we were having a nuclear renaissance. Large-scale power generation or liquid fuels distribution systems were the norm. I think what we've seen over the last 7 years is that distributed generation, small-scale opportunities, those disruptors in the energy market have really made an impact. The idea that the companies of the futures are going to be much more agile, are going to need to be able to respond to a variety of different business models and market environments is actually much more challenging for big players. And we've seen over the last period of several years that these small players, even when they aren't aggregated into large scales, can have a disruptive effect. What do I mean by that? Well, in the United States, I remember the debate about sort of meeting our global climate targets. And one of the things was, well, there's not going to be a new business model for renewable energy because it'll need to reach, 50, 70, 80% penetration in an electric power market to actually make a difference. And what we found is that even in a market where you only have about 20% penetration of renewable energy supplies into the market, if it's distributed, it's changing the business model. Now, right now in California, in the middle of the day, they're selling electricity at negative prices. Negative priced electricity is a hard thing for the California market to deal with. Utilities in California, the business model in California for electric power markets, and I would venture to say probably pretty soon transportation markets as well, is being disrupted by small players. And it's not by the kind of scale that we thought was going to be necessary to challenge these businesses to create new business models. And then finally, what's happened in this new energy paradigm as it relates to climate change? In the period leading up to 2010, we were still in that Kyoto Protocol mindset, right? The idea that the world had to divide up and aggregate down carbon targets, and that this global regime would basically lead the way to reducing emissions and tell us the pathway to dealing with global climate change. Well, somewhere around 2007 to 2010, we figured out that that was probably not going to work. And we came up with what appears to be a really great solution to that, which is the Paris Climate Agreement, which essentially folks thought, well, who could hate? You basically put your best effort forward. Everybody else kind of grades it and judges it. You either do it or you don't do it, and then we'll help you do better next time. That's pretty good. Well, the question is, that's the bottom-up method. And can the bottom-up method actually deliver on the expected outcomes? And I think what we're going to see going forward is some combination of this top-down, bottom-up effort to try and meet the global climate challenge, and we'll have to see how that pans out. Now, we have a lot of global energy goals, and I think all of you know what they are, and part of the purpose of this conference is to talk about some of them. But I was asked to talk about geopolitics as well, and I think that one of the things that I always point out is we think a lot about energy in my business, but we also think about geopolitics, and geopolitics and energy have something to do with each other. And in this day and age, it seems like there's a lot of energy goals, but there's also a lot of challenges. And your challenges aren't always the same thing as your goals. And so I think when we're talking about some of the geopolitical challenges that are facing the energy sector these days, many of them have to do with a two-tiered problem. This is a slide that I took from the late Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski. He didn't make the slide, he just wrote a paper. He didn't make a lot of slides, so I made a slide for him. About what he was talking about, the nature of global change right now. And the nature of global change was called the Global Realignment. And it is happening above and below the surface. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the above surface challenges and tie them to the energy world. And then I'm going to talk about the below surface problems, both of which I think are really important to understand when you're thinking about how the world might change and how some of the challenges that we're facing might affect the energy sector. Above the surface, you have a competition among the world's major powers for control. Control of global systems, control of global institutions, but increasingly control of their own spheres of influence. And so these are the ways that Dr. Brzezinski had characterized some of the challenges, characterized each of these major powers, and then also some of the challenges that they face. So you've got the United States, still a very powerful country, but no longer a superpower, and realizing over the period of time that it was the global superpower, that there are limits to what it can accomplish. And the real need going forward to find ways to build coalitions to achieve the kind of global aims that it wants. Now, we have a new president in the United States. We've talked about him a couple of times already today. He seems to have a different perspective about the way in which the United States builds coalition. I would venture to say that I, as an internationalist, someone who believes in being involved in the global community, can't stand before you and say, oh, this Trump guy, he's an anomaly. He's just this thing that's happening. Please look the other direction. America will get its act together. We'll be right with you shortly, which I think a lot of people in my field are doing. Donald Trump is a real and legitimate faction of the way that the American people think. You tend to think about US politics as Republican versus Democrat. There's nationalist versus internationalist today, and that axis is really, really important for understanding the way the US is acting. The idea now for the Trump administration is that the US will build more coalitions more effectively if we stop asking for cooperation and demand it. We'll see how it works. Russia acting out on the global stage, maybe not because it's strong, but because it's weak. One of my national security colleagues reminded me once that the United States likes Russia when it's not too strong and not too weak, but just in the middle. We seem to have the opposite right now, which is weak domestically and acting aggressively on the international stage as a result of it. Both are a huge strategic problem for most international players. How are we dealing with that? Well, the US, along with Europe, has imposed Russia and sanctions, and in the US has just doubled down on that. That may not have near-term implications on energy markets, which are well supplied, but it certainly could have medium to long-term implications. It also has a lot to do with the way in which China and Russia are acting on the global stage. Look, for example, at another major geopolitical issue we're dealing with now, right now, Venezuela. One of the big issues in the Western Hemisphere is how the United States deals with a failing Venezuela. What do we do? How do we deal with the fact that it has become an undemocratic country, very, very close to the United States with a real and severe humanitarian crisis? The US is considering imposing sanctions, and Russia and China are considering bailing Venezuela out. These are real important geopolitical situations that are happening in very important energy countries and playing out in real time today. Looking at China, the rising China, how to deal with a rising China, I would say the vast majority of strategic time in Washington is spent thinking about how to avoid a war with China. It is thought by some scholars to be inevitable, and is thought by all people to be a really bad outcome. But you see this playing out in the aggression in the South China Sea. Not a hugely significant energy country, or energy region of the world in terms of its resource base, but certainly in the countries that it affects, and the idea of sea lanes being open and free for trade, something that we're all very concerned about. Europe, the declined global power status, not my words, but recognizing that I'm in Europe. But certainly this idea that our partner in creating global institutions having difficulties of its own projecting its power in the world. And if it doesn't have a partner in the United States in doing that, what will that mean? And then finally, the Syrian flag to represent the chaos that is occurring in the Middle East. The Middle East is so important, both for the future of oil production and natural gas production, but also the future of consumption. The Middle East is not really thought of as being a major growing consumption center, but it certainly is. And the chaos in the Middle East and the sort of inability to see a way forward through the multitude of crises that are facing the region is a real and important issue. That's not all, though. Each of those countries that I just talked about is dealing with another set of crises, and these are the ones that don't necessarily have to do primarily with one another, but the ones that are happening internally. Dr. Brzezinski called what's going on the mass democratization, the mass democratization of information. The idea that people now know much more about the world around them, about the trends that are facing themselves in the world, and that they're going to wake up and act on those things. I think that when you look at things like that, in some of these transnational trends that I've put up there but won't summarize for you, what I find is that for most governments and companies, whether it's a government thinking about their energy strategy or a company thinking about their energy investments, the idea that these challenges have nothing to do with them, but everything to do with how the world is going. Which version of the world are we headed to? And this is something Karsten alluded to. The idea that people really want to understand, is this a backlash to globalization that we're going through, and what will the consequences of that be? Is it a temporary pause in what has been the long arc of historical movement to a global liberalized order? Or is this just like that sandbox, just chaos? And I think it's really important to understand, not that that's an interesting academic issue, but that when you're a company or you're a government that is trying to provide social license for the energy that you consume or the energy that you're trying to provide to folks, that social license is something that is up for grabs right now. Every company that I deal with, particularly in the United States right now, is wondering where their social license comes from. They used to think, oh, well, you know, there's the hard social license, there's my permits to do things. Well, I go to the government to get that. Well, if your government is questioning whether or not it has done all of the things that it needs to do because its population is upset about the fact that they've been left behind by trade, or that they don't like what's happening with migration, or that they think there's too much of this global international order mumbo jumbo and we need to take care of things here at home, or the world is just changing so quickly and so rapidly, it upends everybody's social license and it needs to be re-won. I think this is a real and legitimate issue for everybody that's acting within the energy space these days. So just to close, I want to talk about what the heck that means for energy policy. So I've gone from one end where I'm talking about energy to another end where I'm talking about geopolitics. What do policymakers want to do? And this is a helpful policy triangle that we use. It's kind of different for every country, but it basically says companies and countries are trying to put things in the middle of this triangle, and currently energy efficiency is the one that fits, right? You're trying to balance your energy security objectives, your economic objectives, your security and foreign policy objectives, your economic objectives, and your environmental objectives. And I would say for some people, they spend most of their time over on that bottom right-hand side of this triangle, right? Environmental objectives and the climate imperative are chiefly important. Some people spend a lot of time on the economic side of this ledger. If you've got about 1 billion people to lift out of poverty, you might be too. How do you ensure that people have enough affordable and reliable energy supplies going forward? I think that we're going to continue to maneuver around the edges of this triangle for some time to come. But I do think that the energy space is one of the things that, as Anita put it when she opened this up, energy does make the world go around, and it really does connect all of us. And the effort to taking whatever fuel or technology it is that you're selling and trying to make it satisfy these goals is of particular importance right now and can actually be very helpful in those sort of global geopolitical dynamics that I was talking about. Because I think that what happens is, in practice, when you're trying to find solutions, and energy is a really great place to be finding solutions, you can help with some of those social cohesion issues that are really a big part of the geopolitical challenges that we face today. So I'm going to leave it there because I went over my time a little bit, but happy to talk a little bit more about some of the specific energy issues in the question and answer. So thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, one question. Thank you. In one of your slides, you mentioned that the United States is still the strongest, but not a superpower. I am so glad President Donald Trump is not watching this. He would have blasted with a tweet, because he believes America is a hyperpower. But hyper or super America is a great power. And my question to you is that when the United States pulls out of the Paris Agreement, we saw actually two very interesting developments. One, the leaders of most countries reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement. And even more interestingly, states within the United States, New York, California, and also the top companies reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement. So my question is, what is going to be the actual impact then if the United States does leave the Paris Agreement? Is the impact going to be negligible or considerable, because it is still the strongest power?
Yeah, I mean, and I think everybody in the room knows the US can't leave the Paris Climate Agreement. So I would say three very quick things. It's very hard for people to understand, but the administration actually doesn't know what they think about climate change, right? Administration is not a monolith, and the president doesn't care about climate change very much. So actually, the US actually has a period of time where it can be convinced. There are some folks within the administration that cannot be. But I think that everybody in the international community and a lot of world leaders have shown they understand this, is that they actually can do some good to move the administration closer to understanding that doing something about climate change is actually in the US national interest. So I think that folks in the international diplomatic community should spend a lot of time doing that. I think that the question about what the impact is probably on two sides. One is political and what is atmospheric. On the political side, I actually agree with Al Gore a little bit that this is helpful. If we were talking about President Clinton right now, her challenge to be able to actually meet the target that the US set and do better than it would be quite difficult. It's really hard for the US to meet those targets, especially through federal level policy for a variety of reasons. The fact that we had a different administration and that they have challenged the idea of climate change has actually put a good deal of energy into the debate about what comes next. And I think that energy came at a really important time. And I also think it's really important to note that states in the US do have a lot of authority over energy and climate change, and so therefore you may not lose a lot of ground there. On the atmospheric side of the equation, though, I think the challenge is just enormous. And we've got to remember that we can't just hold the line. You actually have to make a lot of progress over the next several years, and that was going to be a big challenge any which old way. So the US has thrown a monkey wrench into the works once again. Did this before, by the way. But we've got to understand that we may be able to derive some positive outcomes from that.
Thank you very much, yeah. Sarah. Thank you. We live in a connected world. What happens in one distant corner impacts us here. 9/11 disrupted the security architecture of the world. 10 years later, in 2011, the global supply chain was disrupted by two events: the tsunami in Japan and the floods in Thailand. And it disrupted the supply chain of automotives, of retail, of electronics. In fact, they say 2011 was the costliest year in terms of economic losses brought about by natural disasters. When 3,000 tons of toxic chemicals exploded in China's Tianjin port, the supply chain of 285 of Fortune 500 companies were disrupted. When supply chain problems caused Boeing to delay its production of 787 jetliners, Boeing was faced with 207 cancellations that cost them $6 billion. In fact, they say supply chain problems cause a company to lose 7% of its share prices. But it's not, we know that it's not just natural calamities and accidents and the old problems such as wars, political unrest, and terrorism that cause disruptions. Today, we face many new many new disruptions, technology, new business models, new businesses, and of course, cyber threats. So how do companies keep their supply chain stable and protected in a world of enhanced and new threats? Here we have Omera Khan, Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management from Copenhagen's Aalborg University. She has visiting positions in MIT, in UK, in Dubai, and Singapore universities, and she's also led research for corporations, for governments, as well as research councils. Omera Khan speaks to us on achieving resilience in a disruptive world.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Anita. I take a lot of pleasure in being invited here and would like to thank the organizers for allowing me to have an opportunity to share my input into what is a very significant week and an event for Norway. So thank you very much for the organizers to invite me here. Now, we are witnessing a new wave of technology and innovation that is on course to disrupt global supply chains as we know it. And my aim, well, at least for the next 18 minutes, I'm delighted to see that the clock is showing me very clearly here that time is ticking away. So just would appreciate your patience for another 20 minutes. I know we've had some fascinating talks, and we're almost coming to the end of it. But what I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so is really highlight some of the significant changes that we're seeing in terms of supply chain risks around the world. We've heard a number of times that we are living in a radically different landscape, and the one coming ahead of us is even more radical. So by talking about some of these business transformations, what I would also like to think about is this term that we are looking at, which is resilience. And just for a moment, I would like you to have a think about the word resilience. What does the word resilience mean to you? What does the word resilience mean? To some, it may mean a little bit of comfort. To some, resilience may mean something quite unknown. To some, resilience may mean danger lies ahead, right? To some, resilience may be a form of, how do I protect myself? Now, I wouldn't stand here as a professor and argue with you and say that the definition of resilience is this. Resilience is probably all those words. But what I would like to do is take you through a little bit of a journey, sharing with some of the trends, some of the sort of emerging technologies that are disrupting our global supply chains, our industries. And then we can all figure out what resilience, we feel what resilience means to us, because it probably means a combination of those things. So let's start off by having a look at the sort of world out there. We are living in a radical state of uncertainty. Natural disasters, nuclear disasters, financial chaos. And this is not just the financial chaos that we're seeing on the right-hand side of the pond here, no pun intended here. But we're seeing a lot of financial chaos, terrorist attacks, commodity scarcity, social disruption risks, the rising nations, falling nations. They're all taking a huge toll on global supply chains. And thanks to the rapid advancements in technology, we're also seeing the widespread use of internet as a business communication tool. We've heard a number of times, you know, the idea of the Internet of Things, big data, and so on, that is having a huge impact on increasing visibility, transparency in our global supply chains, whilst at the same time we are facing the huge risk of cyber threats. And cyber risk is actually very real. It impacts all our supply chains, from healthcare to finance to retail, and basically all internet users are at risk of becoming cyber victims. But as we heard earlier on, the problem with cyber risk as opposed to a traditional physical risk is we don't know which door it's coming in from. And now, of course, it doesn't take a natural disaster or a national catastrophe to actually disrupt a global supply chain. In some cases, it could be a disruption at a single key supplier whose operations fail or become insolvent. And these can bring even the most well-oiled supply chain to a grinding halt, scrambling to actually find a space out. So today's lean supply chains, we can argue, are actually more susceptible to these risks. So we are on the verge of a huge change, and these changes will actually have a massive impact or huge implications to our global supply chains. And many of these impacts will actually come from manufacturing. It will radically change the shape of globalization, and it will change the way that we have seen change occurring in the last few decades. But to truly understand this complexity, it's actually quite important to consider some of the trends that have actually transformed our business models, and these are reflected in the business models of the last 40 years. So in the 1990s, we had the decade of where, you know, the price of shipping goods across the world was significantly cheaper than it was to make them in our own lands, right? So it was low enough to actually manufacture goods in our own countries and still make a profit in our home countries. So we saw the rise of just-in-time solutions. And then in the search of growth and productivity, we relocated our factories offshore to take advantage of even more low labor costs. But these didn't remain low cost for long enough. We then made our factories larger, and we started to mass produce products and stock them, waiting for them to be sold. In the 2000s, if we move a decade later, we saw the emergence of IT solutions. And these solutions were there to support business operations. Companies began relying on these solutions for sharing information, connecting, and generating greater visibility along supply chains to gain more knowledge, but also control of our processes. Now, whilst we saw some gains in productivity, it also introduced a lot of rigidity in our supply chains. In fact, we can argue that many companies leaned too far. We heard the example of Boeing and the Dreamliner. We could go on with examples of, you know, huge paradoxes that were faced by organizations that leaned too far, but we won't point fingers at any particular companies here. But we can argue that they did lean too far, rendering them incapable of responding to the unpredictable and volatile business environment that has quickly become the new normal. Today, organizations exist in a disruptive environment where supply chain risk and change is the norm, change that is occurring on a rapid and unprecedented scale. And business leaders need to actually make important decisions about a future where uncertainty is a given. So let's take fashion retail as an example. And when we think about fashion retail, who better to talk about than Zara? Zara is a leader of fast fashion retail supply chains. When Zara basically came along with the concept of fast fashion, it basically almost annihilated the high street. It was there replenishing shops, you know, its stores twice a week, and the competitors didn't really see what was coming. Zara is an example of an early disruptor, but Zara, with its agility, its process alignment, and its ability to adapt quickly to uncertainty, continues to be a formidable player in the high street today. Now, before I take you through the disruptive technologies that are impacting supply chains, let's just briefly talk about the fourth industrial revolution. It's one of those terms that we actually hear a lot about, but we don't fully understand its true meaning. In essence, it basically involves the advancement of technology into every area of our life, and it will change the way in which we inhabit the world. The consequences of this will be felt across the board as we become more connected, and the old business models, the old systems and the processes will very quickly fade away. Now, many experienced business leaders may be tempted to actually understand these advancements as a linear progression of the old technology and the old business models that we have seen. But evidence actually suggests that the speed and the scope and the impact of these transformations are beyond anything we have witnessed in the past. It's important to actually recognize that change brings with it both opportunities as well as challenges. Business leaders need to chart a new route through these turbulent times and prioritize what is most important and what is most pressing for their organizations. So what they need to actually ensure is, how do we continue to operate on a day-to-day basis whilst we simultaneously we actually start innovating and also acclimatizing to this new uncertain environment. So what are some of these key trends that we are seeing as biggest disruptions to our global supply chains? Well, artificial intelligence is already making huge strides, from self-driving cars and drones to virtual assistants, and these can actually be programmed in a number of ways to perform complex, non-repetitive tasks. In fact, it's estimated that by 2025, around 1/3 of manufacturing will be automated and robotics will work alongside humans. They will be complementing their skills, only faster. For example, last year in the US, they helped Amazon prepare and ship all the products for Cyber Monday, its annual peak of online sales. So, to some, the rise of artificial intelligence or robotics may actually seem a bit of a fantasy or far-fetched, but it has been indicated by the World Economic Forum that by 2026, artificial intelligent machines will be part of the company's board of directors. Not to scare you here, Anna. No one's taking over your position anytime soon. It's almost impossible to imagine this now, yet smartphones, drones, and driverless cars were equally hard to imagine 10 years ago, right? We just celebrated Apple's anniversary this year. It's unbelievable because, as we heard earlier, Apple was back in the days of Adam and Eve, right? Now, as with previous industrial revolutions, some jobs will become redundant. New ones that haven't even begun, we haven't even begun to imagine yet, will start to take their place. But what's interesting here is to understand it's the combined forces of these disruptive technologies that will actually have a greater effect. Consider combining new materials with unimaginable properties when used with new technologies such as 3D printing. And this will be enabled by social media, for example, and other mobile devices. It actually means that it could put production back in the hands of individuals, right? In a way that we've not witnessed since the first industrial revolution. And this could have huge consequences for the way that we behave, the way that we organize ourselves economically, socially, and politically. So the next sort of trend that I would like to very quickly touch upon is additive manufacturing and 3D printing. 3D printing has already improved the plastic manufacturing industry and is now making huge waves in the metal industry. Plastics and metals actually represents around 25% of the global manufacturing production. So these are not small industries, to say the least. And examples of 3D printing, as this slide shows, is a fully printed 3D house. We're already seeing it used in the aerospace sector, in the use of fuel nozzles for jet engines. And companies are using it to increase productivity in the aerospace industry. We've seen an increase in productivity by about 40%. But Industry 4.0 is much more than just growth and productivity gains. It's also about establishing greater and smarter production. It's about scale customization. Now imagine a world where you can buy the exact product that you want, featuring the functionality that you want, with the design that you want, at the same cost and lead time that a product that was mass produced. So are we beginning to see maybe a disruptor to Zara? Right? Industry 4.0 makes this possible. Advanced robotics can be programmed to produce any product configuration without any setup time or ramp up, and 3D printing can produce instantaneously any customized design. Industry 4.0 allows the supply chain to produce a batch of one product at the same cost and lead time as many. Now give a thought to this. The possibilities of billions of people connected by mobile devices with unprecedented processing power and storage capacity, and the access to knowledge are unlimited. So how will this change the way that we live and the way that we socialize? Well, I'm certainly seeing a disruption to academics here, right? But what are the true implications to the supply chain? Give a thought to this. Now, there's a number of trends that I could have mentioned here. You know, we've just seen a $30 billion investment into Daimler for the first air taxi, right? Has anybody heard of the Volcopter? Right? So in Dubai later this year, we will see the launch or the pilot of the first taxi that will be taking us up in air. So like I said, you know, some of these seem like a fantasy, but are very quickly becoming a reality. So let's just quickly have a look at some of these disruptive technologies and these trends and see how do we achieve resilience in a disruptive world? How can we transform our supply chains today? Well, I guess one of the ways, or a good starting point to actually adapt to this new landscape, is let's learn lessons from world-class supply chains whose key characteristics are agility, adaptability, and alignment. And it's the effective management of actually all of these three that could create a condition of a flexible supply chain that can remain optimal and resilient. Agility gives us the ability to actually adapt to this unpredictable, uncertain global environment. It allows us the elasticity to respond, to converge, to embrace new opportunities. Okay? It gives us bandwidth. Adaptability allows us to diversify into new emerging markets. Amazon is a great example of an adaptable company. And then alignment. How do we ensure that in an environment that requires rapid response, like the early disruptors such as Zara, to actually, you know, align our processes where we integrate and squeeze out non-value adding time? How do we compress time to marketplace in a climate that requires rapid solutions? So the AAA supply chain, agility, alignment, and adaptability gives us optimal conditions to become more resilient in our supply chains. And if we start recognizing some of the key impacts of the fourth industrial revolution, which are based on customer expectations, product enhancement, collaborative innovation, and on organizational forms, flexibility will remain to be key. And structural flexibility gives us this willingness to actually invest in solutions that maximize responsiveness rather than focusing on just minimizing costs. So really, just to summarize, this actually has a huge impact on the way that we lead these future organizations. Leaders need to become more collaborative. They need to become more creative and increasingly think outside of the box. They need to create conditions for actually harnessing the talents within organizations. They need to cultivate an environment that allows for creating and realizing opportunities. Today, decision makers, however, are often too trapped in the traditional linear thinking and absorbed by their multiple current crises to that's demanding their attention to actually think strategically about the forces of disruption and innovation that are shaping our future. So, I guess just to sort of summarize, I would like to end on just a few key points that business leaders need to encourage mindsets and behaviors for change. What they need to actually do is think about transforming today rather than tomorrow. They need to recognize that the best decisions are those that keep the most options open. And supply chain, sort of, I guess, the real options approach allows us to expand or contract. It allows us to you know, converge and open up into new environments and shape our thinking in disruptive ways that we may have not thought before. Real options actually allow businesses to take advantage of the upside of risk. So finally, I would like to think about, or I would like to say that we should embrace this change. We should embrace the uncertainty that actually lies ahead of us. You know, turbulence, volatility, uncertainty, and predictability are words that are not going to disappear anytime soon. We should embrace these terms as our sort of new vocabulary in some sense. And on that note, I would like to say that invest in our people, invest in your people, in your processes, in your partnerships. And finally, I would like to just end with a few words of wisdom that was once shared with me in the early days of my career. And that is that, you know, there's sort of three types of businesses. Those that watch things that happen, those that make things happen, and those that wonder what the hell happened, okay? So let's not be amongst those latter. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Omera. You stressed the importance of agility, and I was just wondering, you know, when I think in Norway we have these big energy companies, in the world we have these big energy companies, and, you know, an energy company is something like a warship. A warship takes a huge amount of time to just make a small turn. Unlike, you know, startups, which are like speedboats that can take these quick right-angle turns. How do big energy companies that have huge assets, huge investments, huge workforces, be agile like this?
First of all, it's very important to recognize that agility is not a single company concept. Agility extends from one end of the network right through to the other. And I agree with you, it's a lot more complex for a larger enterprise to be agile. But it's important to recognize that for any organization, you know, agility is not an overnight change. agility is a philosophy, it's an ideology that occurs in an organization. It's a systematic change that is almost as evolutionary as the concept itself, right? So I would say that, you know, in a large enterprise, for example, beginning with your people first and foremost, about cultivating I guess, a culture of agility within people, and you use those people then within your processes and within the wider supply network could be a starting point to actually greater agility across the supply chain.
Thank you very much, Amara.
Thanks a lot, Anita. Thank you. Thank you.
While we prepare the next part, which is our grand panel discussion, we will show you a film, a 4-minute film on digitalization.
Once upon a time, business as usual was often good enough. No more. Where we are going, good enough is dead. In a world where everything is connected, where everything is equally excellent, where performance is reaching perfection, there's only one space left to innovate in: you. Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science fact. Think about self-driving cars or computers that can learn and think. The way we work will never be the same. The skills we need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it? Disruption has become the new normal. With change, it's always gradually, then suddenly, well, things really have stopped happening gradually. This change is exponential. Everything that used to be dumb and disconnected is now wired and intelligent. Cars, cities, ports, farms, even our bodies will be wired with sensors and will talk to each other. These game changers are also combinatorial. They amplify each other, creating a perfect storm of change. Quantum computing fuels big data. The Internet of Things fuels artificial intelligence and deep learning, which fuels robotics. However, anything that cannot be digitized or automated will become extremely valuable. Human-only traits such as creativity, imagination, intuition, emotion, and ethics will be even more important in the future, because machines are very good at simulating, but not at being. Yes, robots and software will do some of our work, but this will allow us to focus on things that cannot be automated. To imagine change squared, you've got to start engaging more with what might be, not just with what is. Immerse yourself in the immediate future, 5 to 7 years out from today. We need to go beyond technology and data to reach human insights and wisdom. Technology represents the how of change, but humans represent the why. The future is about holistic business model. The opportunity is to be liquid, to learn just in time, not just in case, not single improvements, but complete transformations, not individual systems, but new ecosystems. Humanity is where true and lasting value is created. We will engage, relate, and buy things because of the experiences they provide, because of their transformative power. The future doesn't just happen. The future gets happened. The new way to work is to embrace technology, but not to become it. The future is in technology, yet the bigger future lies in transcending it. Let's live and lead from here.
Phew.
May I request our keynote speakers to please come on the stage? And we are very privileged to have 4 new panelists join us. Sturla Henriksen, Jon Arne Røttingen, Finn Amund Nordby, and Finn Langeland. Just to give a brief introduction of our 4 new panelists. Sturla Henriksen is the CEO of Norwegian Shipowners Association. He has been in this job for 9 years, and prior to that, he has worked for Accenture, EU Commission, EFTA. He also served in the Norwegian Finance Ministry, the Norwegian Central Bureau of Statistics, and the Norwegian Defense Services. Jon Arne Røttingen, CEO, Research Council of Norway. He's a professor of health policy in the University of Oslo, and a professor of global health in Harvard, Tia Chan School of Public Health, an expert on health and environment. He was earlier the director of the National Knowledge Center for Health Services. Finn Amund Nordby, CEO of MHWorth, a leading global provider of world-class drilling solutions and services. Prior to being CEO, he was EVP in charge of finance, legal, HR, and HSSE. He has had an international career that spans shipping, offshore, and finance. And Finn Langeland, Director of Communication at the Federation of Norwegian Industries. Previously with NHO and Norwegian Aviation Authority, he was a journalist, having worked with Aftenposten, NRK, and others, and was a press spokesman for former Prime Minister Syse. And our 3 keynote speakers you have over here. I wonder what the collective IQ of this panel is. But my IQ is low, so I'm privileged to ask the questions. So, Karsten, if I can start with you. Each one of those slides we could spend half an hour, but you have talked a great deal, as did, Omera, about the need for agility and the need for adaptability, about resilience. How to achieve resilience? The whole point is how to achieve resilience. What are some of the tips that you could give us?
Yeah. Probably 3 things. First is to, how can you put it, to sort of broaden the radar. So when you scan your market, your society, really to make it more broad than we used to do, because business models are changing, basically. Then obviously innovation. What does all of these changes mean for me and my business, and how do we deal with it? And then it is about people, and I think it was actually mentioned in the end of the movie, because I or Sif, we would actually turn it around and say, it's people first and then technology second. Technology will happen no matter what. So when I work with, say, retail, I work with a lot of great retailers in Norway and in other parts of the world. And if you want to make a resilient strategy for global retail, you need to start by the fact that these people, they love their stores. They simply are in love with stores and store environments and shopping centers and malls and department stores and whatever have we. And before you get that sort of connect in the head that it might be stores and then some of the experiences that were mentioned in the movie, before you get that mental shift, nothing's going to happen. So it's a broader radar, it's innovation, and it's people, and it's probably more about people than anything else.
Sarah, yeah, this is actually not just a Q&A just with one person. Please feel free to jump in, all of y'all, and I'm sure you have also questions to ask. I will be taking questions from the audience for the panelists later. Yeah.
I'd just like to add to that. I think you asked a really good question, how do we actually achieve resilience? And I mentioned at the introduction of my presentation, it depends on what resilience means to individuals or to organizations, right? But if we were to simplify it, if we think about the definition of resilience, it is about the ability to bounce back from a disruption, right? How do we actually come back to our formal shape after being disrupted? So if we were to stretch an elastic band, let go, it wouldn't be distorted, right? So if we think about that from a supply chain perspective or a company perspective, when you mentioned about 2011 as the most catastrophic year, right? The Japanese fire and earthquake and so on, and the Icelandic cloud and whatever that disrupted global supply chains. But those supply chains that were flexible were not as disrupted. And I would say that one of the single most important components for achieving resilience is about having flexibility in our supply chains. And that's why we talk about agility, because agility gives us velocity to speed up at times when we need to speed up. But it also gives us that it's like looking at it as a cat, right? It gives us the nimbleness to be able to move around and to bend and shape ourselves, to modify to a new landscape or to a new environment. And that's why agility is important, because it allows us to be responsive to disruptions in the global environment. So I think trying to find ways on how we can achieve greater flexibility in our processes is one of the most important ingredients.
Sturla, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, on the topic of resilience, I think that there are sort of different aspects to the societal and the commercial resilience. I think that at the societal level, I think resilience is built by sort of elements like inclusion, like respect and decency in the public discourse, and by leadership at all levels. At the commercial side, I believe that it's slightly different in the sense that it's about awareness. As a leader, I'm not so concerned about what we're actually doing. I'm more concerned about what is it that I don't see. What are the clouds on the horizons? What are the threats facing us? What do I see or don't understand? What are the opportunities opening up that I don't recognize? The other is about competence. About competence.
Confidence.
No, competence.
Competence.
Yeah, confidence will be sort of a derivative, but competence, I think, is extremely important. Norway is a large maritime nation. It's not because we have a long coastline. It's because we have been able to develop and nurture our competence. And thirdly, I think at the commercial level, I think it's about culture. A culture of adaptation, a culture of questioning what has been sort of standards up till now, a culture of adaptability and change, flexibility.
Yeah, Finn.
When I was listening to these great speakers, I was thinking about the song from Jerry Jeff Walker, great American poet and songwriter. He says in one of his songs, he says, life is mostly attitude and timing. And I think that's it's a good starting point if you want to discuss resilience, if you want to discuss agility. Life is now, we have to grab it, you know? Not there, you know, but grab it, grab life. And Norwegian industry, which I represent, we are characterized by many things, but mostly an incredible ability to innovate, an incredible ability to adjust. If the marketplace says no to you in one field, you go to the next field. And this has been the success story of Norwegian industry since the Industrial Revolution. As things stand now, our companies don't fear disruptions because they already are handling disruptions. What we fear more than most in this world that Børge Brende talked about so eloquently is an uneven playing field. That a small country like Norway will be excluded from global trade, will receive unfair conditions, and will not be able to grow, and through this growth supply wealth and welfare to this people in
which is why Norway is so committed to multilateralism and
yes,
trade agreements.
We are strong believers in everything that Børge Brende talked about, including World Trade Organization and Bretton Woods and what have you.
Yunane, you had a...
Yeah, I was just thinking about the excellent trends described now by the speakers. Because in a way they seem, at least at the first sight, to be contradictory in the sense that, okay, we have the emergence of big companies taking over, kind of the big IT companies, or originally IT companies, and then sort of expanding. So that's kind of one trend. But at the same time, we have people, the employees, they want less organization, less structure, more individuality, more opportunities to actually define themselves. And how, in a way, so how does that reconcile with resilience? Is it a sort of a planned resilience, or is it just an emergent resilience of the system where there's a lot of redundancy and sort of the smaller units, maybe even within a big company, can actually secure that sort of not planned but emergent resilience that we believe are? And I think Norway, as just was alluded to, has sort of the, at least, yeah, in the small business sector, has a lot of emergent resilience, in the sense of it's about attitudes, it's about actually taking the opportunities when they are there. But I was thinking, do you talk about planned resilience or a sort of emergent one, and how do these trends contradict each other?
Sarah, you are an expert on climate change, and climate skeptics exist everywhere in the world, not just in the United States, all over the place. And I'm just wondering sometimes, is it better to focus on something like pollution, which everybody, even the climate skeptics, agree on pollution? So should we be focusing more on that to get more public support?
Sure, but I think one of the real challenges of climate change is that if you want to reduce emissions significantly enough to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius, which is the globally agreed upon target, pollution doesn't do it, right? You can get rid of pollution, but local air pollution, water pollution, those sorts of things, which quite frankly, is probably a more important driver for many developing economies as opposed to the climate imperative, even though it's really important. But if you were to just focus on pollution alone, it wouldn't actually drop emissions in a way that you need to. I mean, when you look at the level of change that's required in the energy system to get greenhouse gas emissions quite that low, it's pretty dramatic. And so I think, yes, that is a very positive place to start. I think it's one of those things you can do anyway because it makes a lot of sense. It's certainly where we started diplomatically with China. China has developed to a point where it can afford to get rid of its pollution problems. And so to the extent that there are co-benefits of getting rid of pollution and also dropping greenhouse gas emissions, that was really where we started before. I think the other place that I find it usually very good to talk with somebody who is either a skeptic about the issue of climate change or a skeptic that we can tackle it as a problem, which I find there's more people when you really get down to it that are more skeptics about the solution than the problem itself, is the opportunity side, right? When they hear about what major corporations think is the future, and the fact that most major energy companies, even some of the national oil companies, national energy companies, state-owned enterprises in the world, really do fundamentally believe that the arc of the future is lower carbon, they want to understand how to be competitive in that future. And so when it comes to industrial competitiveness as opposed to the climate imperative, if that's not a driver for you, that sort of opportunity side of the ledger can also be quite helpful.
You had Finn?
Yeah, I think regardless of being skeptics towards climate change as an issue, or man-made climate change, more correct, I think everybody should feel a need to clean up their own backyard. And this is happening on a big scale in this country, and it's been happening for years. For many, many years, there were fjords in Norway where you could not fish. You could not eat the fish because it was contaminated. Due to industrial contamination, our companies cleaned up their backyard. And in the process, they also cut emissions by 40% at the same time as they doubled in production. And I think it's a very important thing to appeal to the individuals, appeal to the companies. Some will be front runners, some will be followers, but eventually the world is going to be a better place.
Because pollution, when we talk about pollution, the most polluted cities in the world are in China and India. And that's where there is a lot of buy-in from both the industry as well as the public, and therefore the politicians to do something about it. Finnamun, Sarah had this wonderful slide about the geopolitical tensions. And so I wanted to talk to you about shipping is like the bedrock of international trade. Your company, Digitalize, the MH Worth is, in the powerful sector of drilling and world-class equipment. You are also sensitive to not geopolitical tension so much as the price of oil. So how does oil impact your industry?
Okay, first of all, the big sort of reduction in the oil price has an immediate effect on all, say, the entire oil service business, in that we have to adjust our capacity, etc. But I think the more fundamental changes that has happened in the market as a consequence of reduced oil prices is that oil companies in particular is now sort of forcing through big efficiency campaigns, and also has a big focus on reducing operating expenses, reducing the expense level, being more efficient. And parallel with this, we also see that that sustainability is much more in the focus than it has to be. So these are very important, let's say, or important developments. It is a bit strange that they haven't appeared before. But I think before the sort of significant drop in oil prices, this was a kind of a bonanza industry, and it was about getting as much rigs out there as possible. Focus was on supply, it was not on efficiency. It has changed tremendously. And of course, efficiency in itself goes very well in hand with sustainability. So the impact on us as a company is really to adapt to this change, to work together with our customers, which are the oil companies and the rig owners, the rig companies, to impose more efficiency, to make new services, to make new products that sort of help them in achieving their goals and thereby achieving our goals.
It's interesting you say this, because it's also an example of how crisis can become the opportunity. So you have found ways, because of low oil prices, to improve efficiency as well as, savings. To what extent has then digitalization been a great help in improving efficiency, in improving saving costs?
Digitalization is a great help in achieving both rig efficiency and reduced OPEX. And so to us, digitalization is a tool to make better products and better services for our customers. So just to take one example, in order to be more efficient, to drill more efficiently, we have sort of created an open interface into our control systems, into our software, so that other producers worldwide of good products, maybe a software company in Arendal or a software company in Houston, have made an interesting new development that can benefit the driller. We sort of integrate it with our equipment, and the end result is a more efficient production system. And the sort of strategic decision is, do you want that? Of course we want it. It was a very easy decision. We want an open interface. We cannot, as a company, develop all this software on our own, so we have to be open for other companies to invent these apps so that we can make our customers more efficient.
You spoke about sustainability, and I wanted to ask Sturla Henriksen about how to improve sustainability in the maritime sector.
Well,
specifically, let's take shipping, for instance.
Yeah, well, we believe that shipping and the maritime industry is part of the solution. Obviously, we have a job to do in the sense of always improving our operations, and that is being done. Transporting a container from Europe to Asia today requires approximately 1/10 of the energy required 30 years ago. So this is a development going. But in a wider perspective, Norway is a small country. We are one of the largest and most advanced maritime nations in the world, and we are confident, this time we are confident, that we are standing on the threshold of what will be the century of the oceans. The oceans are covering 70% of the surface of the Earth. It represents maybe as much as 90% of the biomass because they are so deep. So we believe that the World Wide Web of logistics provided by this industry could and should be extended. We believe that offshore oil and gas industry will be further improved. Today, 1/3 is produced by offshore installations, where shipping is in all parts of the value chain. But also renewable energy from the oceans. The fastest growing energy sector today is wind farming and offshore wind farming. So here we think that we can make contributions. We believe that food production in the oceans will and should increase, not only from production close to the shore, but also ocean fish farming is developing. At the seabed, there are vast deposits of rare earth minerals and metals which can now be commercially extracted. And also the deep oceans are the research front of advanced medical research. And here there are large opportunities. I
remember when we were talking earlier, he mentioned about the Uber of the seas. That's possible as one of the routes and ways of getting sustainability.
Yeah, that's a way of reducing emissions from current activities and future activities. I mean, we can improve hulls, propulsion, fuels, different fuels, but also by using modern information technology, we can now better assess where in an individual fleet or in the world fleet, where do you have capacity? Where are vessels in ballast? And then you can envisage that you have sort of an Uber of the seas, where you can look at your phone and see that I need a cargo from A to B, and there are X number of vessels.
You know, this doomsday clock is ticking, and I do want to take a few questions from the audience. But before I do that, Junane, if you could just talk to us about, Norway produces excellent quality research. There is still a problem when it comes to commercial applications. A lot of it is done, of course, by the research, by the industry. But what is the best way of bridging from laboratory to market in terms of testing out these research findings?
Well, I think we need much more of connectivity between the sort of research community, the academia with users, and I think that's the new paradigm definitely in research and innovation. The old school, in many ways, is that researchers define the up-to-date, the new technologies, and I must say, after seeing these speakers talking and the last film, I'm not sure whether I'm ahead of the curve or
nobody can be.
So, and I think so. Really, I think and probably digitalization and actually the seeing that research can be done in new ways will also drive this sort of new trend of more user-oriented research and more connectedness between industry and also public sector as a user of research sort of knowledge and academia, because I think things are happening so much faster. The foreign minister started with the 90s, and I've been a researcher since sort of early 90s, so 25, 30 years. At that time, kind of my supervisor got sent in the mail floppy disks with a list of new papers in our field. And then that was the way to be updated. Then these sort of, in the 2000s, these floppy disks turned into larger databases, still professional on the web. And today, Google Scholar, push notifications, kind of knowledge is not any longer exclusive to us as researchers. It's actually a democratization. Everyone has the access to that same information and knowledge. And I think that really changes the way researchers need to operate as well.
Any questions from the audience? Okay, great.
Thanks for your great talk.
If you can tell who you're asking the question to.
Thanks for your great talk.
Microphone.
My name is Daniel from Sintef. You're talking about preparing for the future, but how should a company avoid risking into opportunism?
How should a company
avoid risking to be opportunistic when preparing for the future?
Is that really a risk, being opportunistic? I would say in the current climate, being opportunistic actually is a key competence, right? I think too often, I think some of the mistakes that we human species make is that we labelize too many things, right? So we think by calling ourselves opportunistic or risk takers or entrepreneurs or whatever are bad terminologies. I think going into the future, I think the future leaders will be those who are actually opportunistic. I think the future leaders will be those who actually dare to disrupt themselves before they are disrupted. So I think actually being opportunistic is not a problem. I think it's something that we need to embrace and achieve.
Any other question?
Can I just add something to that real quick? So when you talk to utility providers or people who work in the oil and gas industry in particular, I think that there is a mantra right now of change and of being able to be prepared for the future. But for a lot of these companies, they feel a burden. And the burden is to provide the essential services and the goods that they have that in a way that actually meets customers' needs. And so for some of the companies, they're really concerned because some of the surety and certainty they need to be able to provide those services isn't in vogue right now, right? So like to actually be able to get a return on investment as a utility provider of electricity in the United States is a harder and harder thing to do, but it is literally essential for all economic and political life within the United States. And so they're trying to do just what you said, which is become prepared for the future while also doing what is core to their business today. And I think we are watching how different companies are doing this, and some of them, they sort of segment off parts of their business so they can experiment with how to be that way, to be innovative, to act in a different way without betting the farm, right? So for example, the US had a massive, uptick in oil and gas supply recently, and it wasn't because of Exxon and Chevron and Shell and Statoil. It was because of 1,000 little companies and guys with drilling trucks, right? You can't be that if you're Exxon because you are too structured, you are too big. And so what some of the companies are doing is basically buying up the little companies or trying to cordon off parts of their business so that that part of their business can go be that innovator, but they're protecting their core assets. And so I think some of those strategies are really important for companies that are just too big to fail. And they're becoming aggregators of those little companies as well. So I think that there is a world for, sort of, being able to kind of stick to your knitting, but also find those strategies to be able to, innovate as well.
Nothing you wanted to.
There's going to be the start of the Norwegian electoral process tonight in Arendal. It's going to be live on TV. You have to watch it. You're going to hear a lot about taxes, the so-called formueskatten. You're going to hear a lot about the exploring, looking for oil and gas in the north of Norway and so on and so on. There's going to be big differences. I'll tell you what my big worry is, looking at it from an industrial point of view. It is that the uneven playing field will occur not because of Trump, not because of China or North Korea. It will occur because the politicians in power will feel that they need to grab more money from industry, tax us harder, thereby creating a very complicated situation, particularly for export industry. Because if you are in the export business, becoming number 2 doesn't make you anything. If you win, you win.
Winner takes all economy.
That's it.
But I wanted to talk about one thing which we have not touched upon so far. I mean, we've really talked a great deal about all the advantages of this fourth industrial revolution, and we've also talked about digitalization. But what about job losses? That is something that is going to happen, and that is, in a lot of ways, people say that politics is driven by these sort of sentiments. So we have these 3 perils of democracy, as they call it, the protectionism, populism, and polarization. But in a sense, this is all coming around to certain kinds of, issues brought about by job losses. So I would like any one of you to answer this question: why did digitalization and all these technologies promise great future, great opportunities, great possibilities? What about some of the downside in terms of job losses where people are afraid? Yeah.
I think for speaking on behalf of ourselves, I think what's important for us is to stay competitive, to stay profitable, and to use whatever means there is in terms of advanced new technology, including digitalization, to do that. And it may be that the impact on that is that we will not grow in terms of number of employees. But I think if you don't do it, if you don't grab the opportunities, and if you don't develop as a company, then you're doomed. So for us, it's essential to utilize all the digitalization, the machine learning, the augmented reality, things that we have been talking about today, to develop our services and our company going forward.
Any questions from the audience?
You got one way up.
Okay. Sorry? Great.
First of all, I just want to say I'm British, and it's absolutely amazing this week. And I really wish we had this kind of political engagement in my country. If we did, maybe we wouldn't have Brexit. So well done. I'm looking for somewhere else to live beyond the next 2 years. First of all, an observation. The foreign minister intimated that gender equality is a norm in Western society, but I note that only 2 out of the panelists standing in front of me are women, and that both the keynote speakers who have left were male. So whilst I think this is an absolutely fantastic forum, I would ask that in future you have a better gender-balanced panel. I say this because I work in gender equality, and it's a fight that I'm involved in my personal and political life. I should say I'm a member of the European Parliament here, but I'm here in a personal capacity actually to support the Children's Press project.
And your question is?
Well, a number of questions. Right, I'll try and be quick. But where are human rights in the conversation? Are human rights in the international agreements that the foreign minister mentioned? But they're not explicit, and do we need to renew our commitments to human rights and make them more explicit? We're all here and we have mobile phones, smartphones, but how many children in the Democratic Republic of Congo died in the conflict wars there? I also have a question about GDP. Is GDP a fit-for-purpose indicator of a nation's well-being? In Nepal, happiness is the national indicator.
No, that's in Bhutan. Yes, please, because we're running out of time. The doomsday clock has stopped, actually. So,
yeah, I mean, on the human rights issue, I think in many ways that is a part of the level playing field discussion. And I think the foreign minister alluded to that, and it has been alluded to by the panelists here. We need a level playing field. What we have seen in sort of the decades behind us is concentration of production. And of course, then supply chains are important. I would speculate that with the new technologies, new opportunities, we may see less concentration and more disaggregation of production, but we need to secure, and the only driver for that is actually making sure that there is a level playing field and the rules and obligations are met across the world.
And you know, if Omeria's presentation is right, we may not be talking about gender balance, we might be saying about a human balance. It might be a CEO, an artificial intelligence, speakers. Yes, Finn.
Just want to make one comment, and that is, which we haven't touched upon maybe in this panel, but we have so big challenges ahead of us. There are so big and fundamental changes that what I see as a CEO is that it's impossible to do this on our own. Yeah. So I think going forward, it's all about collaboration, cooperation between other companies from different businesses. How can they help us develop as a company? I think that's a very, very important.
When the discussions get very interesting, everyone wants to say things, but this clock is ticking. So 15 seconds to you and 15 seconds to you.
The biggest challenge we are facing is to lift 1 billion people in this world out of misery and poverty. We can do that by technology. We can do that by giving them a good education, good health system, and Norwegian industry are active in all these sectors, and we're working with the Norwegian government among the poorest of the poor to lift them up from misery. And that is really the issue at stake, in my opinion.
Yes, and you, Sherla?
On the issue of human rights, it's directly connected to what we've been talking about. The world has never been a better place for so many people. And that's due to the cooperation, to the integrated value chains, and then we can agree that we still have a way to go to ensure the distribution of benefits and opportunities. But I think that the obvious way forward for that would be more cooperation, building more bridges and fewer walls.
And to the lady questioner, please do stay on for this whole week, because a lot of those answers, questions that you raised, you will find the answers at least being discussed in the course of this week. But time has come to an end, and thank you all so much. A warm round of applause to our wonderful panelists. Thank you. As always is the case, there is never enough time to discuss all the issues that we want to. One of the things that I really did want to talk about was about one of the real side effects that we have seen in this fourth industrial revolution is income disparity, how that has really aggravated. And this is, we know that people with capital will always benefit, but now we know that people with knowledge and skills will also benefit hugely. People in the finance sector benefit hugely, but there are a lot of people who are getting left behind. And that is one of the biggest challenges that we have going forward is how do we make sure that this industrial revolution goes forward in a way that there is inclusive growth. With that, I must come towards the end of this. Just a couple of closing remarks. I'm sure some of you would have read this book called *Sapiens* by Harari. It is a brief history of yesterday, and it is a wonderful book. He has come out with a new book called *Homo Deus*, which is a brief history of tomorrow. And many interesting insights. And one thing that he says is that in the past, power came from access to information. Now, he says, power comes from knowing what to ignore. And that is a useful tip, because we live in a world of information overload, and it's called information waterboarding, because so much information is actually a torture. So, but thanks to the insights provided by our experts and our panelists today, we know some of the issues that we cannot ignore. And in the course of this coming week, you will be able to discover more about these issues in Arendal. And so, thank you so much for all of you all to being here. Over the last 2.5 hours, we have discussed many issues, many trends, many problems, sometimes even found some solutions to some of the problems. But remember Charles Darwin, new problems will come up, because why? Change is inevitable, change is constant. So new trends will come up, new issues will come up, new problems will come up, which is all the more reason that you must all come back here next year. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you. And have a wonderful week.